G'day and welcome to the very first edition of PlaybyPod, a fresh new podcast that explores the art of sports broadcasting across a range of sports across the country, from TV, radio and streaming platforms. My name's Chris Yeend, and I'm joined by the very first edition by the great man, Daniel Viles. Thanks for being a part of an historic broadcast here on PlaybyPod.
I wouldn't have the courage to say no, Chris. Wonderful concept. Looking forward to seeing if we can make this fly.
Absolutely. And the irony of, well, I guess you could say irony of the initials of PlaybyPod, we think of play by play, so P by P. I think it has a bit of a ring to it. So I guess you and I across 2023, we've spent a lot of time talking about commentary, and a lot of key points that have been raised throughout our commentary circles is there's just not enough content out there that talks about the art of broadcasting and basically education points of view to sort of get that across. There's just not much material out there across Australia.
Professional commentators want to keep their cards close to their chest. They most of them give you the same bits of feedback, and they're all out there. And yes, the only way to get better at commentary is to practice it. But yeah, I think there's been a real reluctance for anyone to actually tell you how they do it, certainly not in a public forum.
Precisely. So the aim of this podcast, to go with the many podcasts on options across Australia that are available, is we want to bring people in, learn about their history with commentary, what they love about it, what got them into it, talk about some key points, and also discuss probably a moment with every episode on a piece of commentary that we like. And so we've got a nice juicy one to start up with. So that's what it's all about. So we'll see how we go there. But mate, tell us about your commentary journey and what sort of piqued your interest to go, you know what, I'm going to give sports commentary a go.
I think, if we go way back, my dad was very much someone who was a devotee of radio with pictures. So if there was, and our family sport was cricket, or at least my dad's and mine was, put the cricket commentary on. I don't have the same reverence for the Channel 9 team of yore. Bill Laurie and Tony Gregor, there's no way I'd line up for their autographs, dead or alive. But we would always mute the TV commentary and stick the ABC on. And so the commentary voices that I grew up with were your Jim Maxwell's, Neville Olivers, and from England, I was a bit late for John Arliss, who's one of my heroes, but Brian Johnston from the BBC team was very much one of them. Then I was lucky enough to work in radio for a while, and I always shied away from commentary because of the way it took up weekends. And I had a young family. My kids were born when I was doing radio, and I thought, well, look, that'd be a nice thing to do, but I've seen sports commentary equals divorce, more or less. And then but then when I actually bit the bullet and decided to do it, I think like a lot of commentators, it's a very common story. I decided to become a commentator when I was an inpatient at a psychiatric hospital. Very common story. But no, we were looking at, my life had hit rock bottom, and one of the things we were learning about was, what's really us, what sorts of things are we doing when you're thriving, what's something you'd like to do where you can get into sort of that flow state where you have more energy at the end of it than you do at the beginning because you're just being you. And I thought, well, I've been avoiding sports commentary for a long time. What if it's the thing I'm really good at and I've never tried it? And going into it and actually doing it, I did a lot of prep before I joined the Quaffle W, the Aussie Rules comp for women here in Southeast Queensland. And the more I did it, the better I felt. And so I thought, okay, I've hit upon something here. I don't know whether I'm ever going to get to be professional or whether I'm just going to be a sort of a high-level amateur. You think of footy players around the country or any sport, there's a lot of people who never crack the big time, but you watch them play and you think, okay, I'm not worthy to be on the same field as you. So it's kind of, how good do you have to be to still suck? So I don't know whether I'm going to be able to crash through the barrier, but essentially I've had a go at commentary because it was something I'd always been interested in, and I stayed with it because it seemed to it seemed to be something that resonated with my soul, for want of a less airy fairy phrase. So that's I think that's me.
Was it something that sort of drew you to go, look, I want to do some play-by-play, or I want to do interviewing, I want to do presenting, I want to do special comments, and particularly with AFL? Was there something that sort of drew you to any particular part of commentary in any particular sport?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a play-by-play caller, even before I knew, and it's probably because I'm not an ex-player, and
Yeah.
every time I'd listen to it, I mean, the commentary teams that I loved have always been the combinations of you have your nerd who maybe wasn't so good at the sport, but just knows everything that ever happened anywhere, anytime, and then next to them is the grizzled old player who's been there, done that, knows what it's like, and if you have two ex-players, then they seem to talk in their own world and never bring in anyone from outside of it. If you have two commentators who haven't been there before, then they can tell you everything about the game, but they can't tell you what's in the game. Mm-hmm. And so the best teams I've found, and every now and then you hit the jackpot with someone like a Richie Benaud in cricket, who is both a trained journalist and a participant. Probably someone like Dennis Cometti as well, who was an ex-player and had his commentary chops as well. And so you every now and then you get someone who has the double jackpot. But for me, I thought, no, I'm someone who played sport well enough to enjoy it, but was never going to make the big time. But I was always the one that could tell you, what happened in the third test of the 1968-69 tour. And so I thought, let's go with that. And apart from that, I'm just a word nerd. I mean, the most famous thing I did when I was on radio was a poetry segment. Well, it was mainly a comedy segment, but it pretended to be a poetry segment. And so for me, just the love of the word, wanting to describe things in good ways, not wanting to become the show. Some commentators get so flowery that they forget that people actually want to know what the score is. Mm-hmm. But I've always loved people who played with words and who just lifted. With good commentary, you enjoy a game more. I've learned, and so I thought, well, what if I can be that guy?
My commentary journey is probably one filled with lack of confidence as a kid growing up. I was always one of those shy kids, horrible at making friends, or I was the guy that used to stand around on the fringe of the group and just be there. And for probably a better description of it, if I didn't say much, no one would notice. But for some reason, as a young kid, it was just commentary just got to me. I was the kid as a 9-year-old. I fell in love with AFL in country Victoria. I've echoed this story many times throughout my circles. I used to watch VFL on TV. This was in the 90s, so we're talking. I think the ABC call used to watch. I used to get on to watch Springvale and Williamstown play on Channel 2 a fair bit, and then I used to listen to 3AW, whatever game was going on a Saturday afternoon. And then I'd pick up my copy of the Herald Sun. I'd have my Friday paper, my Saturday paper, and my Monday paper. So Saturday afternoons, I used to just lay in front of the TV, have 3AW blowing really loud. 9-year-olds are out on their bikes and all that sort of stuff. But I guess growing up in regional Victoria, it was just too cold. And then I fell in love with wrestling. And a couple of mates and I, we did the old backyard wrestling. We ignored the signs. Do not try this at home. But a few of us did. And so for me, I actually grew up in front of a camera where we did commentary. We did our own play-by-play. We had to build characters. For me, I was more fascinated by the promo work, and I was so shy, absolutely horrendous at it. But it was just, I grew. The more I did it, it was like, okay, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about that, camera on now, and we're just going to drop it. And this is the kid that's very shy. So I threw myself into that, and I got better the older I got. But I've just been, probably like a lot of people who may be listening to this or watching this, I've just started watching the documentary Beckham. And there's a big reflection on the FIFA World Cup 1998. And I got the Nintendo 64 game, FIFA 98. And it just got me thinking as a kid when I got it, when I was 10, 11 years old when that came out, I used to spend hours in my room. I used to turn the volume down and I used to commentate. I didn't know who David Beckham was. I didn't know who any of these players were. But I used to just create a story while playing the game on the old Nintendo. And I was like, bang, I just did it without even thinking. And then I threw myself into debating at high school. Did the whole handful of notes on a piece of paper, bombed on my very first one. It was terrible, but I just threw myself in there. So when I got more into when there was an opportunity to do sports calling as a sort of a 20-year-old, the opportunities at my local radio station they were there. And I did radio shows, and I just gradually started to improve with ad-libbing. And so sport always drew me back to this is what I'm going to do. And then I was lucky enough in 2009 for the Riddle District Football Netball League back in Victoria. There was an opportunity to do some trial games and sort of build a team where I ultimately, I know there's probably mates out there that are watching it. I was like, I'd put people in spots where they were calling, and I'm like, that's kind of what I wanted to do, but I wanted to create the vision first. And we had this historic occasion in 2009 where Highlands FM in regional Victoria teamed up with Energy 3NRG FM in Sunbury, and then Southern FM on the outskirts of Melbourne. And we had 3 radio stations broadcasting the Southern Footy League via the RDFNL Interleague. And we covered, I think we covered several hundred kilometres on community radio for this one big game. It was massive. But for me personally, it was like, I was more about how can we grow, how can we create? And I was lucky enough to go, hey, let's do this and bring the people along for the ride. So I did about 6 years of commentary for the RDFNL, built it from the ground up, worked with some wonderful people and had some wonderful memories. And that was very special for me. The first year that I did play-by-play was in 2011. I started going out with my now lovely wife, and I didn't really have the confidence anyway. I was like, what am I doing? And I threw myself into one game, and I'm like, okay. It was at Riddle v Diggers Rest. It was the grand final rematch of the previous year. Rematch of the grand final from the previous year. And I was off. I was like, okay, we're in. And then I got Jess involved in the next week, and the game ended at halftime, and due to an unfortunate injury to a player, it was like, okay, we're away now. And we were lucky enough to win a couple of national awards too after a couple of years, and then after my radio journey there, we moved to Victoria. I think when I was working as a journalist, I'd always got in trouble from the lovely employees.
Sorry, moved to Melbourne.
No. So I got told I prioritised radio broadcasts on the weekend over my other work commitments. So we had other leagues that we're involved in, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm calling down here this weekend, and it's a different league. So my lovely former editor, and I've thanked very recently, gave me the opportunity to go, you know what, you're good at this. You're managing the other areas, just go for it. So, and then when I landed up here in Queensland, I basically just said to AFL Queensland in 2019, I love community radio. Every time I go to a game, I want to I want to listen in. And they're like, well, we don't have community radio, but we do have a spot available in the QAFLW competition. And away we went. So I was lucky enough from there. Then I had a chat to Jason Bennett, and he encouraged me to get into VFL, and I started doing work at SEN, and I was able to get a few AFL games too. So the process started from very humble beginnings back in the day, but it was the only place where I kind of felt comfortable. And there was one game that I did. It was a under-18s game, second semi-final, and Rupert's Wood were playing Macedon at Tony Clark Reserve. And this, for me, was probably the biggest game of my career at that point. It was the biggest game, one of the probably top 3 memories that I remember now, even out of all the games that I've called, out of the hundreds I've called. But Macedon came back from all against the odds. There's this superstar called Seb Malatek who kicked 6 or 7 goals in the day. They beat Rupert's Wood, who hadn't lost a game out of, I think, 48-game win streak they had. And we were right on the balcony, surrounded by plenty of people, and the crowd were going absolutely bananas. They were thriving. They were eating away from our energy. They were just feeding into it. So that the more excited I got more excited, and they ramped it up. So it was just this remarkable energy of this once-in-a-lifetime call and once-in-a-lifetime game. The two faced off in the grand final. Rupert's would beat Macedon by 20 goals. So we knew that this was something special, and that gave me the appreciation of being there with the spectators and thriving off their energy, which you just can't encapsulate anywhere else. So that's sort of my journey to, from the days of, and of course I played 1,000 games of footy in the backyard, kicking it around. I had 2 teams, and I'd split my friends up into 2 different teams, and I'd had games going up, made up stats, and gave voices to my female friends who were interviewers.
But this is what we do. We create, like, the story of commentators or people who grow up to become commentators making these worlds in the backyard. I mean, with us, it happens to be sport. I mean, we're basically the sports version of the kids who read all the fantasy books and maybe play Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. They're creating a world which for them is perfect and safe. And I feel like we're doing the same thing in the backyard. Like I'd be out in the backyard, kicking whatever shaped ball or bowling whatever shaped ball. And there's something about
balloon.
That's it. That's I mean, for me, yeah, cricket, 4 codes of football. You see some hockey at the Olympics, so you go outside and get a cricket bat and a tennis ball, and that's hockey. But somehow adding your own commentary to it is what makes it important. And I think the sound of Australian backyards is kids playing in the backyard alone with someone else, but they are commentating the house down and the rest of the world becomes irrelevant. And even people who have no intention of commentary, that's what they do in the backyard. It's almost like adding your own commentary to it makes it matter. It's like this has gone from being me playing in the backyard to a matter of international importance where you can't quite believe there are not journalists there interviewing you after the game.
It's like the biggest thing since sliced bread, isn't it? And essentially that's probably where a lot of hear a lot of stories of famous or players are going to become well-known athletes. It's them kicking the ball around the backyard until it's dark, till they can't see, and they're making their own dialogue about what they're happening, whether it's mentally or verbally. It's a form of storytelling. I guess a form of storytelling. They tell themselves, "Oh, I might actually be good at this," and it helps them improve.
Yeah, it's no, this is a very common experience, and really, one day we need to get a commentator on one of our banknotes. So that's really the only logical conclusion to all of this.
Oh, I think didn't Richie Benno get on a $2 coin or something like that?
It had to be a $2 coin, didn't it? So, couldn't go on a $5 note, but anyway. So yeah.
So as you can see, throughout our storytelling, throughout our commentary passions, it is very much the art of storytelling that just keeps us coming back to the well. And I think the beauty about it's calling, interviewing, you're doing the tech stuff behind the scenes. You're there seeing something that hasn't been done before. It might have been replicated in different forms, but you're physically being there. You're seeing history rewritten right in front of you. And I think that's the most unique part of broadcasting in sport. Doesn't matter what it is.
I mean, I've got a formal music background, and so the number of people I've spoken to where I notice, first of all, we're improvising. There's an element of jazz in what we do in sports commentary, but also it's not just you riffing by yourself. In the same way that if you're doing a solo in a jazz combo, you have to listen to what your drummer's doing, you have to listen to what your bassist is doing, you have to be aware of what's around you, you have to be aware of the mood in the room. Even to say, okay, what do I want to communicate to these people who are right here in front of me? And we're doing that as well. I think one of the traps that I occasionally fall into with commentary is I kind of bring a story to the game instead of looking to see what the story coming from the game is. And so the more that I'm able to engage with the game and find out, okay, what's going on here, what can I say about what's happening in front of me right now, and then riff with it, they tend to be the ones that turn out the best. And then at a different level, the elements of commentary which relate to things that are like, I know a lot of singers who have been through a lot of training. The way we use our voices, I mean, obviously content is very important, and we can talk about that more later in the episode, but the way that we change our volume, the way that we change our pitch, the way that we change our speed, these are all things that singers have to do as well. And one thing I'm looking at just as a side project is things like, how do we make sure that we breathe correctly for the next segment? So when you see in Aussie Rules, when you see a clearance from the middle, and then you might look forward and you see 3 or 4 teammates lined up down the left, making sure that you take a breath at the beginning so you can sort of almost sing your way through the rest of the passage. So that's a little bit sort of, level 4, but that's just one of the things I think about about commentary, sort of finding things that I can learn from other spheres that link in with what we're doing.
I also find that having a background as an AFL umpire, I know there's not too many sports outside the AFL that do have that play-by-play commentary, but I've really felt what AFL umpiring resonates with me when you're umpiring with somebody else is that how long you have the play for before you pass it off, and essentially when you're in that AFL space and you're calling or you're umpiring, you've got to be you got to have your attention at 100 the whole way. So you have to pace yourself, and that's where you get the handover to your next call or your other umpire too. So then you can reset, look around, and then go again when the time comes.
Which comes back to jazz combos. I mean, we've all heard commentators who basically decide, okay, this is all about me here. I'm going to keep going for ages. I've heard saxophonists do the same thing in jazz clubs where they've forgotten there are other people on stage. They're just off. And so, yeah, knowing it's funny because you need a bit of ego to have the confidence to put a microphone on and call a sporting fixture, but you also need enough humility to realize, hang on, this is going to sound better for the people who need to hear commentary if I share with the other person, and realizing that you are kind of part of a combo in the box there.
And these are things we'll cover in future podcasts as well. But just to add one more point to that too is if you are the saxophone player, you're caught in the moment and you're oblivious to everything else that's around you. If you are calling and you're in the moment, you don't have the chance. I mean, you and I we've called games on our own where we're so caught up in this little box, whether big cricket or AFL or other sports, and so you don't have time to look outside the box because you're too busy trying not to drop the ball. So I found over the years, the more that I've done more co-calling in different sports, is it's been a lot easier where I can learn a lot more by not calling that I can feed into to my call. A couple of questions I'm going to throw you away. What do you remember about your first game, if you still remember it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, my first game of Aussie Rules was 2021. So it was round one of the Quaffle W, Lation Park, Yeronga. And it was you and Jeff Newman, from whom I've learned very different things from each of you, but I've certainly learned a lot from both of you. And of course, there was a sponge. I was just turning up to watch and see how everything worked. And it's like, no, mate, you're on special comments. And thankfully, I had been, because I'm one of these people who needs to know everything. So I had notes on different people. I knew that at that stage, I wasn't particularly good at analysing a game of Aussie Rules. And so I thought, right, my role here is when there are little gaps in play, come in and tell stories about the people and flesh it out a bit. And I've since discovered, now I did that because it was all I had that time, but over the course of an Aussie Rules season, it's actually good. You give all the stories and bios earlier in the match. If you're still doing that on grand final day, it's like, no, we've heard all that for the past 3 months. Right now, we just want you to concentrate on the game. So it's not a bad way to shape the story anyway, but I did feel comfortable, partly because you and Jeff made me feel very comfortable, partly because I'd already had a lot of radio experience behind a microphone. But also there was a real element of, this is so cool. So it was good. The following week I did my first play-by-play, and it was a little scarier. And there were bits where I missed the play, kind of fell behind it, and then would pick it up for the goal. And so I thought, okay, that's something to work on, because when you do practice at home, you're usually calling off a TV, and the view you have is very different from when you're at the ground. And I thought, okay, it's round 2 of the season, long season in front. At that stage, I had I was prepared just to do a year of special comments so that I could find my chops, get used to it. Opportunities opened up, and I ended up doing play-by-play regularly by the end of that season. So it's always good if you can find a volunteer role in a league that people are about to leave, because that will open up opportunities for you. So I fluked that, but I've gone off a bit of a tangent there. But no, the first game, there was a little bit of don't stuff it up, but it was mainly this is so cool. How about yourself?
My first game was Woodend Heskett v Macedon over Tony Clark Reserve. I was a head trainer over at Woodend, but I was making that transition into doing some sort of calling, and I let the club know that this was probably the path that I was going to pursue after being...
Just stop there. For those of us who don't speak fluent country Victoria, where are we?
So we're Mount Macedon, so Memorial Cross, smack bang an hour north of Melbourne and an hour south of Bendigo. And when you're driving up north from Melbourne, it's the first lot of mountains that you see. It's one of the coldest places that I've ever experienced. So,
thank you. You may continue.
So I was doing first aid there. That was my way to get involved in senior football, and Jay and I, who's best man at our wedding, we went down to the ground earlier on in the week, met everyone there. But we met some of the key people there, and we got to learn about the club and a bit about the history, and so we just started planting the seeds. So I would I would finish, doing my being a trainer for probably, I think I left about half time of that particular game, and then went up and we did it all via the telephone line. So it was all people at the ground probably couldn't listen in because it was still that significant delay. But yeah, we had some good moments there, which was pretty good. So yeah, I haven't forgotten about that one. I've still got a photo of it sitting around somewhere. There's me in my my white footy shorts, which I wore as my trainer gear at the time. Had my Woodend Heskett Football Netball Club polo, and I had my Highlands FM hat. So something from my playing days, something from my club supporter days, and something from my radio days, all in the one hit there. So
something old, something new, something borrowed. Was any of it blue?
Navy blue. It was the polo, sort of dark navy
there we
blue.
Go.
So
right,
yeah, it
okay.
works. There, we're on the way there. What has been your most challenging moment as a caller? Like a particular game where you were like, "This is tough. Something's gone wrong," but you haven't forgotten it. And I think of
do you mean?
Well, so I often think of the worst moments end up being probably the best stories.
Yeah, it's. Can be answered a few ways. I mean, one is where things have technically gone wrong, and thankfully, it's usually been something where, because I've gone into commentary in my 40s, I've thought, okay, there's not really much we can do about this, and either there's a tech person there who's just doing their thing and has enough stress already, or it's something that I get walked through. So those things are challenging. Secondly, I mean, I am someone who gets too hard on myself for mistakes that I've made, and there are remember back to the mental hospital. There are reasons why I'm too hard on myself, but that's a totally different podcast. But I remember not the first game I called play-by-play, but after that I was back on special comments for a rep game, and I started talking about a player out on the ground who I thought was Macy Brown, who normally plays for Cooperoo but was playing for the Lions Academy that day, and I started talking about what she was doing out on the field, and then down below the commentary box I heard, "No, I'm Macy Brown down here." And I looked down, and sure enough, she was telling the truth. After the game, she came up. Oh, that's right. She came on as a sub later and said, "Oh, the commentators worked out who I am yet." But after the game, I went down and met her, and yeah, she said, "Oh, sorry about that." I said, "No, that was so funny. That was brilliant." We've gotten on well ever since. And the following week, I made another mistake involving Ash Williamson, who very quickly became one of my best friends in the competition. But when I made the mistake, I didn't realize I'd made it on air. It was when I was watching it at home later that night, and I was watching it sitting on the couch. My face, I assume I went white. I grabbed a pillow off the lounge and just buried my head in it. I felt absolutely ratty, and then basically I went up to her and confessed and said sorry, and yeah, that's worked out great. So yeah, I think the challenging days, certainly the ones where you make, where I make mistakes, where I've misidentified someone on a big moment, they're the ones that I find hurt. And so often sometimes it's the challenge during the game, sometimes it's the challenge when you're replaying everything at night.
Oh, that makes perfect sense, and I think that's the perfectionist that comes in the space of being a caller, isn't it?
Look, it is, and probably in terms of a challenge that I felt I handled well. Preliminary final a couple of months ago in the Quaffle W, there was a major upset where the minor premiers, who were, in fact, they'd won the minor premiership with only one loss, and beaten in a big upset. I remember the crowd was just stunned at the end of it, and I was trying to be fair to the winning team by communicating their emotion, because they just made their first grand final as a club, and I was trying to be fair to them, and I was also trying to communicate just how stunned and upset. I mean, there were women crying in that match, and being aware of it, and I ended up listening back to it, and I was really proud of it. But at the time, trying to make sure that I wasn't focusing too much on the losing team, so the winners couldn't come back to me and say, "Well, it was our big day," and you spent the whole time talking about them. But similarly, not talking too much about the winning team, so the losing team couldn't come back and go, "Yeah, great, we've just all been shattered, you've rubbed our noses in it." And so making sure they got equal airtime was tricky, and I'm sure I could have done it better, but yeah, that was the most difficult bit of commentary I've had to do, and I was happy with how it turned out.
But I think that's the art of storytelling, though, isn't it? Is that you're looking at it as a broadcaster, you're looking as a fan of the competition, and what's the biggest story? The team that's lost the preliminary final in shocking circumstances in one of the most one of the games of the year that no one would have ever predicted the result, or the team that's the Cinderella story of coming through to a grand final. And if you've had a team that is, regardless of what competition you're calling at, I had the pleasure of calling the QAFL Senior Men's Grand Final last year. Broadbeach played Aspley in Queensland, and I don't know whether the biggest story was Aspley winning the grand final after coming down from the VFL, or Broadbeach not having won a game all year, not having lost a game all year and then losing the big one. If I'm, putting on my journalist hat, I'm probably looking at the team that was expected to win and go, that's shocking. I don't think anyone would have predicted that result. Like if you're putting $1.01 on the team that's lost the fewest games all year and they get rolled later on in the final series, then that's the challenge that it comes as a broadcaster.
Well, I mean, the truth in both of those situations is there's more than one story. And I think if you think of it in terms of a newspaper back page, with the Aspley upset of Broadbeach last year, your main story on the back page is the winning team and the photo of them. But then the second story on the page is a fair chunk of it. Like it might be sort of, the bottom quarter to a third. Whereas had it been the other way around, where Broadbeach got their expected victory, then 95% of the back page is, Broadbeach complete undefeated season. And the remaining 5% is an ad for a dodgy tyre manufacturer. Yeah. And you put the story of the losing side on the inside page. So I think it's a case of saying, okay, there are two stories here, and the nature of it is that you need to give more space to the team that won because they won, but how much of the back page that second story takes up changes depending on the context.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the intriguing things about what we see in front of us when we're calling any form of sport. If we get the expected result, then I think it does take away a little bit from that as a caller in terms of how you tell that story, which is why I feel sometimes when I go into a game where if a team that's favoured to win gets rolled, I probably get up for that a little bit more, or it gets really, really close because you're seeing something quite special here, and I like the element of unpredictability when it comes to a game or a match. I've called squash before, I like to think that if the underdog gets up. That's probably reflective of me too. And when it comes to storytelling, because I probably feel that I've had people ahead of me throughout my career that have just been so talented and they've got through and they've done a few things. But I always have that sort of ingrained passion for the underdog, and I probably see myself as an underdog sometimes, of having to fight that little bit harder than some of the other people that I've had the pleasure of riding shotgun with. And that's an absolute no disrespect to anyone in the industry, and just even professionally in other areas. But I felt that I resonate more with the underdog, so I want to see the underdog fight.
I've read a lot of articles about why humans tend to go for the underdog. I mean, the fairy tales do not end with, and the giant got rid of that annoying little Jack and he was never seen. That's not how the fairy tales end. I think the hardest ones to sell are when the story gets repetitive. For example, this year in the Quaffle W Grand Final, the team that was expected to win did, but it was their first premiership. So there was a story there. Where it gets tricky is when a team wins their sixth premiership in a row. I think we've seen that in men's tennis in the last 20 years, where how do you sell the story of yet another Djokovic Grand Slam, another Federer Grand Slam? Nadal's won his 8th French Open. Let's all get what's down the pub? So exactly. I think when it's been repetitive, they're the hardest stories to generate, and what you end up looking for is things along the journey, maybe a little bit of adversity, or you go the other way and say, if they've just won 6-love, 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 you say, okay, this was perfection itself. So it can be a little bit tricky to find the stories, but yeah, as long as there's a human involved, there's usually a story there somewhere.